Okay, I found some time to get a quick video done tonight, so we'll have a look at 4 or 5 charts before I get off this computer for a while. Please pause the video and read the disclaimer first. Okay, first one, ERA. I charted this one both on the blog and the members forum 2 days ago and pretty much caught this move to a T, which was nice. There's that daily trend. We go back to the weekly, you'll see it's been a sad state of affairs for a few years ago. It was as high as $12 or so. Back down here around $1.50, but let's go back down to the end of the day. Look at this volume in the last 2 or 3 days on the breakout. So it really started to signal with the volume 3 days ago. Without breaking out, that's when I did the chart, and the volume's really kicked on the break, which is nice. Now we run some fibs on this. Okay, now I've run the fibs from that previous high up here down to the low, and as you can see, it basically has hit this 38 fib is really key resistance, so it's pretty well touched it there, and it's right on it now. I think it's 57.5, so effectively we're a little under it. That's this res up here at least. We're a little under it, but it's certainly right on some fairly key resistance at the moment. Given the volume that's going through, you'd think it's half a chance of kicking through, and we might be looking at somewhere around that 70 mark for the 50. So still plenty of upside, and obviously a lot more upside if it decides to bounce with any real strength, even back to those highs back in October, right up at 220. So I'll just keep riding this. I was mostly out of it today on the spike early. I'll see if I can find 15-minute chart. We'll go to intraday chart. That's the intraday chart. I actually sold some up here this morning. Missed this dip, and if we have a look at that dip down to 41.5 or something, go back to the end of the day chart, it actually filled the gap perfectly. Might be able to see it better on an hourly. Look at that. That dip filled that gap perfectly. It was bot driven. You had to be in the depth to get any back, but I missed adding any there. Go back to the intraday. I think I basically added again on a break around here as it kept making these higher lows. It was quite obvious it was going to kick on. I think I started getting a few back here, and then break of that resistance a few more, and break of intra high a little bit more. Still only probably about a third the position I had on the initial break. It's been such a good trade, I was happy to take quite a bit off the table and try and let the rest ride. So that's ERA. Well, I'm trying to focus on a few charts that kind of look similar, that have been pretty downtrodden. Those of you that have had much to do with me will know that I do like to look for these previous market dogs that hopefully have got a bit of a bounce in them. ELD, not a dissimilar chart to error. Big volume in the last 4 or 5 days again, and previously back here. So certainly in this last month or so, some consolidation kicking in. Now, obviously the key resistance you would think is that 25, which is right there. 25 there. Up here we've got 25.5 or so, but I think 25 would do me, given the volume that's going through. A break of 25 would do me for an entry. Stops, I'd probably run it all the way back to a break of, if I was going to give this a chance, I'd go right back to a break of that low there. So you'd be looking at it 20.5 or 20 cents. You'd be looking at a 5-cent risk reward. If I wanted to be a little bit more conservative, I'd maybe pull up this hourly and maybe look at, once it gets more than halfway back into this range, be out. So I might even give it back to only like 22.5 or something like that. Take a larger position and keep it tighter, but obviously aware that there's a fair chance I could get whipsawed out of that. Okay, so again, you could run fibs on that to get a few potential targets, but there's some obvious chart targets along the way that have been resistance. There's 27.5 there, 28.5 and on. So there's a fair bit of a resistance ahead, but given that you'd imagine there'd be a fair few shorters on that, you'd think there's a possibility of a little short covering rally if nothing else. Okay, next one I'm going to have a look at is Oakton. Mentioned this in the live chat a few times. I've been in it, covered a few days ago or last week somewhere when it got a little bit ahead of itself, as you can see from this chart here. Again, another one that's been in a fairly steep downtrend. The downtrend line's been broken, followed by some sideways action and some increased volume. So they're the signs I'm looking for to look for a bounce. Basically, there were a couple of obvious entries, I suppose, once it started to swing here. That one there was the really obvious one, break 127.5. You wanted to be more conservative, you had 128.5 there. It's ran quite nicely and now had a little dip. We might go back to the hourly. We'll just see if that the depth of that dip could have been picked up by the fibs. I haven't done this as yet, so alright, let's run that from there. We'll go back to there for a start. So it did find support there at that 38 fib, or going the other way, it's obviously 62. It certainly looks like it's found some support around that level. Had a couple of false breaks through, but certainly kept above it there. And then if you wanted to look for some potential targets on the bounce, you could run it this way. I'd probably forget that tail, maybe just run to there. Now that's kind of a bit of a gap here, and interestingly the 50 fills that gap, so that would be my first target around the 47 mark for Oakton. I'm not in that one yet, but we'll certainly be looking at taking a position tomorrow if it behaves itself. Okay, next one we're going to have a look at is BPT. It's not typing, is it? Try again. Alright, we'll go to the end of day chart first. Okay, it's getting back down towards this 200 moving average. It's hit it a couple of times in the last 12 months and bounced quite well off it. Previous dips have not even gone anywhere near it, so a little concerning that it's got this close to it. But a week now of consolidation, you'd imagine the volume since that sell-off there started to dry up, so you'd expect that possibly the selling started to dry. Probably go to an hourly chart and just have a look there. Obviously the downtrend, that's a 5-day moving average. I think downtrend's been broken and there's this sideways action. Maybe $1.40 would be a safe-ish entry. I've actually started getting some, as per I think I mentioned on Twitter and also in the live chat. I've started getting some today, only a smallish position so far, as it broke that little resistance here. The 36 looked like a bit of a double bottom, almost triple bottom along here. So I've taken an early entry, which I tend to do from time to time, obviously being aware of the risks of taking an early entry. And again, if you wanted to, you could run some fibs on this. So you could maybe run on the hourly range, something like that. There's a few potential areas that I'd be looking at. 38 there, about the 143. 50 looks to have picked up this area of significance there quite well, 147. So there'll be my first couple of areas. Someone asked me in the chat, I think yesterday, sort of what my target was in error, and with all stocks I don't really have a set target where I say if it hits that I'm out. I basically just have a series of areas of interest to me that I'll look at and make decisions as it gets to there as to whether I'll lighten, add on a dip or whatever. So I like to try and ease in and out basically all the way up and down rather than just having one single set entry and one exit. Okay, so that's BPT. Last one I'm going to have a look at is Gin. It's another one I've been buying in the last couple of days. Fairly significant sell-off. Okay, there's the daily. Obviously got pretty ahead of itself as well. It's run from 30 cents to almost $1.80 in 3 or 4 months, so you'd expect a pullback. Let's run some fibs on this one. Well, those fibs actually line up beautifully from the bottom. Looks like it's sort of pulled up around this first fib. It's got through it a couple of times, but it certainly has basically closed on or above it in the last couple of days. That also picks up that high there, interestingly. If it fails, we might see down around 100. The other thing I'd tend to do is bring this fib for another view up to the breakout point. So we'll bring it up to that point there. Just see whether that tells us anything. So it's probably about there. And look at that, right on the 50. So a fairly significant area I would have thought that we've started to bounce off. We'll pull up a 15-minute weekly. So there's this sideways range. It's bounced, dipped, slightly higher low, so that's encouraging. Now we really need to see a break of that 122.5, and you'd suggest that that downtrend line on the 15-minute would be broken. There's some fairly decent volume on the way down, so I'd like to see this volume kick back in on the way up to give me a little bit more faith. But we'll run a fib on this one as well. Like I said, I don't use these fibs as some kind of be all and end all for targets, but just they give me some areas that I know other traders may well be looking at as well. So 135 would be one of the first areas of interest. The 50 picks up this dip quite nicely. That's 142. So plenty of upside in that. If I was being really aggressive with my exit, if I was not in this now, which I already am, I've been buying on this dip and this dip as well, I'd probably, if I was buying on the break of that 122.5, I'd have my stop just under there. So you're only risking 5 or 6 cents, something like that, with plenty of upside. Alright, that'll do me for tonight. Talk to you soon.